At Clarence House, in London, on the morning of June 11th, 1998, William Tallon, page to the Queen Mother, walked up the back staircase from the basement kitchen carrying a wooden trolley. On the trolley were 2 crystal decanters of gin, 1 of Dubonnet, 6 bottles of Schweppes tonic water, a silver bucket of ice, a lemon, and a small glass dish of maraschino cherries. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. The Queen Mother was upstairs, in bed, reading The Sporting Life. The trolley was the 3rd item brought up to her room that morning. The first had been her tea. The second had been her newspapers. Tallon would carry it up the same staircase, in the same order, 6 days a week for the next 4 years. That is the story this script is about. It is not a story about a personality trait. It is not a story about a tipple, a quirk, an aristocratic foible, a charming aristocratic small. It is a story about a staircase and a trolley and a named page and a set of named suppliers and a building with a basement kitchen and an upstairs bedroom and 28 rooms in between. The story is the building. The story is the people inside the building. The story is the bills the building paid. Most of what was in those 2 crystal decanters can be reconstructed from the public record. The single best public record source is Major Colin Burgess, the Queen Mother's equerry in the late 1990s, whose 2006 memoir Behind Palace Doors set out the hour-by-hour timetable that ran through Clarence House for most of the years after her husband's death in 1952. Burgess did not invent the timetable. He carried it. He himself mixed the martinis. He himself was the staff member to whom the Queen Mother addressed her famous 6 o'clock question. The timetable is institutional, written across half a century, served by named hands. Here is the timetable as Burgess documented it. At 11 o'clock in the morning, gin and Dubonnet. 1 part gin, 2 parts Dubonnet, with a slice of lemon and 3 ice cubes, served in her room by Tallon or by Reginald Wilcock, the page of the presence. At 1 o'clock at lunch, red wine, almost always claret. At about 2 o'clock, sometimes a glass of port. At 6 o'clock, what she herself called the magic hour, a martini, usually 2, mixed by Major Burgess. And at 8 o'clock at dinner, 2 glasses of pink champagne. The pink champagne was, as often as not, Veuve Clicquot. The Queen Mother was one of Veuve Clicquot's biggest private clients. The arithmetic on that timetable is not in dispute. 1 measure of gin equals 1 UK alcohol unit. A glass of claret equals roughly 2 1/3 units. A glass of port equals roughly 3 1/2. A martini holds roughly 2 1/2 units, and a flute of champagne holds about 1 1/2. Add it together at the lower end, and you arrive at 10 units in a day. Multiply by 7, and you arrive at 70 units in a week. That is the most cited number for the Queen Mother's weekly intake. Lady Colin Campbell put it on the public record in her 2012 biography. The Guardian arrived at the same arithmetic from the same timetable. The official biography by William Shawcross, published in 2009 with unrestricted access to her papers, neither confirms nor denies it. The official biography simply does not count. That silence is the first piece of evidence. The arithmetic is in the routine. The routine is in the equerry's memoir. The equerry's memoir is on the public record. And the official biography simply does not perform the arithmetic. Some silences are louder than speeches. Here is what 70 units a week means in modern medical terms. The UK Chief Medical Officer's Guideline, revised in 2016, is a maximum of 14 units a week for either sex. The British Liver Trust calls drinking above 50 units a week harmful for men and above 35 harmful for women. 70 units is therefore 5 times the low-risk threshold for either sex, and twice the threshold at which the British Liver Trust says liver damage is likely to be occurring in a woman. 70 units is the dose at which the National Health Service recommends a transient elastography scan to look for scarring. Margaret Rhodes, the Queen Mother's niece, who served as her lady-in-waiting from 1991 to 2002, has always insisted her aunt was not a heavy drinker. She has said the Queen Mother preferred a martini mix she made herself. Burgess, who knew the routine because he was inside the routine, called it steady rather than excessive. Nowhere near, he said, being an alcoholic. But here's the thing about the word alcoholic. It is a medical word, and it is also a moral word, and the staff who served her did not have to use it. The staff measured what they carried. They did not have to call it anything. Move now from the noon trolley to the rest of the day, because the noon trolley is only the opening movement. By 12:15, the Queen Mother was downstairs in the dining room, where the table was set for lunch, where the wine had been decanted, where the second drink of the day arrived in a different glass, carried by a different page. By 1:30, the wine had flowed. Tim Heald, biographer of Prince Philip, who lunched with her once for research, wrote that phrase precisely. The wine flowed. 2 gin-based cocktails before lunch, in his observation, pink in color, almost certainly containing Dubonnet. He did not say she was drunk. He said the wine flowed. The distinction is the distinction the household made for 50 years. The wine flowed. Nobody was ever drunk. That was the rule. At about 2 o'clock after lunch, port. Not every day. Sometimes only the wine. The port was carried in by Wilcock, or by the under-butler, depending on which staff member was on the dining room rota that afternoon. By 3, she might go to bed for a short rest. By 4, tea was brought up by a different member of the staff again. The trolley that had carried the gin in the morning had by then been wheeled back down to the basement, the crystal decanters refilled, the silver bucket re-iced, the maraschino cherries replaced. The trolley was kept in service every day she was at Clarence House. It moved up and down the staircase 6 days a week, never on Sunday because Sunday lunch was elsewhere, for as long as anyone in the building could remember. At 6, the magic hour. That was Burgess's job. The Queen Mother would settle into the drawing room, and Burgess would arrive, and she would smile and ask, "Colin, are we at the magic hour?" And Burgess would mix the martini, almost always two. The phrase magic hour was her phrase. It is the phrase her equerry put on the public record after her death. It is in the equerry's book, and in every modern survey of her drinking habits. Magic hour. 6 o'clock, the martini. At 8, dinner. Champagne. Pink champagne, more often than not, and more often than not, Veuve Clicquot. The same Veuve Clicquot that held a royal warrant from her daughter Queen Elizabeth II, the same Veuve Clicquot whose corporate records list the Queen Mother as one of its largest individual private clients. 2 glasses, sometimes 3, sometimes a small port to finish. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. Look at the staff list this routine implies. 1 page for the morning trolley, 1 footman for lunch, 1 under-butler for the afternoon port, 1 equerry for the martinis, 1 page for the in-room service, 1 pantry footman to wash and reset the glasses, 1 man in the cellar to count the bottles in and out, 1 driver who carried the gin in a flask on long journeys. Add the woman in the kitchen who arranged the lemon and the cherries on the dish, and you have at least 9 people whose daily working hours included the supply, the transport, the mixing, the serving, the clearing, and the laundering of the Queen Mother's drinks. 9 staff members, 6 days a week, 50 years. That is not a tipple. That is an industry. Run the inventory back another way. The trolley contained 2 crystal decanters of gin. Each decanter holds, in the standard royal household size, the better part of a liter, roughly 24 units of pure alcohol. 2 decanters. The Dubonnet decanter held a liter. The Schweppes tonic bottles, 6 of them, were the proportion the household kept for visitors who took gin and tonic rather than the gin and Dubonnet ratio. The silver bucket of ice was the size of a small dinner table tureen. The maraschino cherries were arranged in a glass dish, 12 cherries, replaced daily. Across a single morning at Clarence House, the trolley supplied not only the Queen Mother, but anyone who happened to be in her company before lunch. The decanters were never returned to the basement empty. They were returned roughly 2/3 full. The refill was the household's daily fact. The cherries were the household's daily fact. The lemon was the household's daily fact. The ice was the household's daily fact. Every one of those facts had a name attached. Every name was on a payroll. Every payroll was settled out of the same civil list entry that paid for the wave from the balcony. The household kept its books. The household kept the inventory. The household just did not publish either. And the household paid for that industry. The Queen Mother received £643,000 a year from the civil list. Her household ran at between £1 and £2 million a year. The gap was made up partly by her own income from inherited capital, and partly by an overdraft at Coutts, her bankers, that by the late 1990s had grown to approximately £4 million. £4 million was reported in the Sunday Mirror. $4 million was reported by Lady Colin Campbell. $4 million was, after her death, the figure the palace quietly absorbed out of the estate before the will was sealed by High Court order. Lady Colin Campbell, in her 2012 biography, made one further claim. She wrote that a number of London liquor suppliers carried the Queen Mother's accounts at a loss, and that some of them were eventually put out of business by the carrying. She did not name the suppliers. No biography names them. The will is sealed. The probate is sealed. The High Court order took effect in 2002 and is the reason the public has never been given a roster of creditors. What we know is what Campbell wrote, and what the audience of this channel has converged on in its comment sections. 191 likes underneath a video on this subject said the same line, in the audience's own words. She ran up bills with all of the alcohol providers. A few businesses were put out of business due to her debts. That is the audience's verdict. It is also the most documented verdict available, which is to say, it is Campbell's verdict. And Campbell's verdict is the verdict that the household has spent 24 years declining to confirm or deny. The named verified accounts are these. Berry Brothers and Rudd, at number 3 St. James's Street, the oldest wine and spirits merchant in Britain, has supplied the royal family continuously since the reign of King George III. Their corporate history page says so on the record. Berry Brothers held a royal warrant through the entire reign of George VI and the entire life of his widow. Veuve Clicquot in Reims held a royal warrant from Queen Elizabeth II and supplied her mother's table. Giusterini and Brooks, the Mayfair wine merchant founded in 1749, held a royal warrant of the era. Corney and Barrow, founded 1780, held a royal warrant of the era. 4 named, royal warranted London houses in the public record supplied a household whose overdraft at Coutts ran to £4 million. What the public will never see, because the will is sealed, is the line-by-line accounting of how much each of those 4 was owed when she died. That is the institutional half of the story. The other half is the language, because while the household was carrying the trolleys and the suppliers were carrying the accounts and the bank was carrying the overdraft, the press office at Clarence House was carrying something else. The word. The word was tipple. The word was enjoy. The word was charm. Look at the official royal website today. Read the page on Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The word alcohol does not appear. The word drinking does not appear. The word that appears in the official biographical paragraph maintained by the institution that buried her is enjoyed. Enjoyed a tipple. Enjoyed her racing. Enjoyed a hostess's life. Enjoyed. You can run that word backwards across the documents. Read the obituaries from April 2002. Read the tourist guides that sell biscuit tins in her image. Read the Bell's whiskey decanter that the distillery released for her 2000 centenary. Read the cocktail menus at Glam's Castle, her ancestral home, where the staff today still serve a gin and Dubonnet cocktail with 3 ice cubes, because she always insisted on 3. Tipple. Enjoyed a tipple. The word does the work of 50 years of staff and £4 million and a sealed will and an unpaid roster. The word is the cover. The word is the institutional answer to what the trolley actually meant. What the palace carefully left out of every official account was this: Spitting Image. The satirical puppet show that ran from 1984 on ITV was the first television program to put the gin bottle into her hand on screen. The puppet held Gordon's gin and the racing post and spoke in a Beryl Reid voice. The country recognized it instantly. The country had always known. The institution had simply never said the word. The puppet was the moment private knowledge became public knowledge, and the institution's response was silence. There was no palace denial of the spitting image puppet. There was no press office correction. The institution let the puppet stand because it was easier to let satire absorb the truth than to confirm or deny it in a press release. Walk it back to where the brand was made. In September 1940, the German Luftwaffe began the bombing of London. The Queen, who was Queen Consort then, not Queen Mother, she would not become Queen Mother until her husband's death in 1952, toured the East End in pearls and pastels. She visited a hospital after a bomb. She visited a school. She was photographed in the rubble. The line she gave the press was the line that would carry her for 60 years. She was glad Buckingham Palace had been bombed, because now she could look the East End in the face. That line is in every biography. That line is what the brand was built on. The brand was the Blitz mother. The brand was wartime. The brand was the smile that did not flinch when the bomb dropped. And the brand was, from the same period, the gin and Dubonnet. Because the same biographies that record the East End tour record her drinking through the war, through the king's stammering broadcasts, through the abdication of his brother, through the air raid sirens. The drinking and the smile arrived in the same person at the same address. The press chose to print one. The press chose to fold the other into charm. The brand had to do work. The brand had a job. The brand was carried 15 years later into the August 2000 centenary. On her 100th birthday, the country queued along the mall to see her wave from a coach. The newspapers printed special supplements. Bell's Whiskey released a centenary decanter, a Bell's bottle, on her face, on the front shelf of every off-license in Britain. The country sent her 100,000 birthday cards. The British Legion held a parade. The official line ran continuously. She was the wartime mother, the smile in the rubble of the Blitz, the woman who had said the children would not leave her side and she would not leave the king's. The same official line ran on the same day she sat at her 7:30 breakfast table at Royal Lodge, having had her first measure of gin and Dubonnet placed on her bedside table at 11. The country saw the wave. The household carried the trolley. The two facts did not, in the press of August 2000, ever appear in the same paragraph. The press had a brand to protect. The brand was 100 years old. 8 days later, Reg Wilcock died of cancer at 66. The page of the presents was no longer in the room. Tallon's partner of more than 3 decades, was buried. The press did not run the funeral. The press did not run the partnership. The press had been carrying the wartime mother brand for 6 decades. It did not, in August 2000, find space for the man who had served her drinks for 40 years. Wilcox's funeral was a household funeral. It was not a national one. That is the verdict the household had built into the brand from the start. And here is the gap. Princess Margaret, her daughter, drank too. Margaret drank vodka and orange in the morning, a glass of whiskey in the afternoon, more vodka with dinner. Margaret's drinking was not a secret. Margaret's drinking was disapproved of by the public. The press called Margaret a problem, called her dissolute, called her a worry to her sister the Queen, called her an embarrassment by the early 80s. Margaret was, in the press, the cautionary tale. Her mother, drinking on the same volume in the same houses, with the same suppliers, was the national grandmother. The gap between Margaret's reception and her mother's reception is the gap between charm and ruin. The same routine, the same suppliers, 2 opposite verdicts. The institution made the verdicts. The institution chose which woman to call a problem and which to call a tipple. The verdict was a press office choice. It was not a clinical reading. It was not a moral reading. It was a brand decision. Run the comparison in numbers. Margaret was born in August 1930 and died in February 2002. She lived 71 years. Her mother was born in August 1900 and died in March 2002. Her mother lived 101. The 30-year gap is the gap the press read as proof that the mother's drinking was harmless and Margaret's drinking was lethal. Read the gap another way. Margaret died 7 weeks before her mother. The 2 women had drunk through the same households, with the same pages, served by the same suppliers for 50 years. Margaret's intake by the late 90s was, by every published account, broadly comparable to her mother's. Margaret had had a stroke. Her mother had not. Press the question. The household ran the same routine for both women, the same staff, the same suppliers, and the institution in the obituaries called one of the 2 outcomes a tragedy and the other a national life. The household had nothing to do with which outcome occurred in which body. The household had everything to do with which obituary got written. The pattern repeated. Margaret was photographed with a cigarette and a drink. The Queen Mother was photographed with a posy of flowers and a smile. The same household, different props. Same brand decision, applied differently. That brand decision rested on a single word in a single Churchill quote that everyone in Britain still remembers, and almost nobody has ever sourced. The line that has circulated as a Churchill quip for decades, that if the Queen Mother ever went for a water test, a gin bottle might come out, is not in Churchill's documented papers. Richard Langworth, the senior fellow at the Hillsdale College Churchill Project, has spent decades documenting what he calls Churchillian drift, the tendency of unattributed drinking jokes to attach themselves to Churchill because the audience wants the Prime Minister's permission. The water test line is one of those drift quotes. There is no Churchill source for it. The line has done 30 years of work as a charming little permission slip, and the line, like the tipple, like the enjoy, was the brand decision the institution made and made stick. Trace the cost of the brand decision through the lives of the staff who held it up. William Tallon, by 2000, had served 50 years. In August of 2000, his partner, Reginald Wilcock, died. Wilcock was 66. Wilcock had been the page of the presence, the man who served the Queen Mother in her own room for 40 years. He died 1 week after her centenary of cancer. After Wilcock's death, the staff who knew Tallon say he was sidelined. The nursing staff coming in for her final 18 months were younger, and the household reorganized around them. By March 2002, When the Queen Mother died, Tallon had been working in the building for 51 years. He was not informed of her death by any palace official. A journalist called him. He found out from a reporter. Some weeks later, a letter was sent to him at Gate Lodge, the cottage at the perimeter of Clarence House where he had lived for decades, instructing him to vacate. There was no leaving party. There was no formal thanks. There was no service of any kind. The letter said the lodge had to be returned to the household. Tallon's own description of the letter, as Tom Quinn recorded it in the 2015 biography Backstairs Billy, was exact. As far as the household was concerned, he said, I was simply an ex-employee, as if I had worked in the palace for 6 months washing bottles. 6 months, washing bottles. The man had spent 51 years carrying the trolley up the staircase. The household processed him in the same envelope it would have used for a parlor maid, hired on a 6-month contract. That is the cost of the Brand decision, measured in the body of a single named man. The institution that had been carried by Tallon for half a century declined to send him a leaving card. The institution that had absorbed his partner's funeral in 2000 declined to absorb his presence by 2002. The institution that had let Spitting Image do the satire, because the satire was cheaper than a denial, declined to let Tallon do anything at all. By the time he died, in November 2007, the cottage was already let. His estate of approximately 700 lots was auctioned on the 5th of July 2008 by Riemann Danzy of Colchester. The auction realized more than double its £500,000 estimate. The most quoted lot was a single handwritten note from the Queen Mother to Tallon. 3 sentences in her own hand. I think, she wrote, that I will take 2 small bottles of Dubonnet and gin with me this morning, in case it is needed. The note sold for £16,000 against a £3,000 estimate. The Sunday papers published a photograph of it. The handwriting was firm. The note was undated. The note was the household, written in the household's own voice. The note is the receipt. The note is the document the institution had spent 50 years preventing from being written down. The note is the moment the Queen Mother, in her own hand, instructed a named member of staff to carry the named drinks at the named hour. The household had spent 50 years arranging her drinks through indirection. The note is the moment the indirection broke and the principal asked for the drinks directly. The note sold for £16,000 because the British public, by 2008, understood what the note was. The British public had always understood. The institution had simply never confirmed. And here is the contrast that closes the institutional file. Margaret's drinking sat openly disapproved of in the British press for 40 years. The same press, in the same 40 years, called her mother adorable for the same intake at the same hours. Margaret died on the 9th of February 2002, 7 weeks before her mother. Her obituaries use the word troubled. Her mother's obituaries, in March of the same year, use the word beloved. The institution made one a warning and one a totem. The intake was identical. The household was identical. The suppliers, in many cases, were the same suppliers. The pages, in many cases, were the same pages. The page of the backstairs at Clarence House had served both women across decades. He had carried the gin and Dubonnet up to the mother's bedroom and the vodka and orange across to the daughter's flat at Kensington Palace, and he had watched the public verdicts arrive in opposite directions on the same Monday afternoons. He did not write a book. He kept his peace until his own death. The household preferred it that way. After her death in 2002, the will was sealed, the accounts settled, the civil list entry closed. The Coots overdraft, by every available report, was paid out of the £19 million she had moved into trusts for her great-grandchildren, and out of the larger estate that passed, tax-exempt, under the 1993 inheritance arrangement, to her elder daughter. The 4 named suppliers and the unknown number of unnamed suppliers received what they were owed, or accepted write-downs, or absorbed losses, or, in the cases described by Lady Colin Campbell, closed. None of the 4 are named in the sealed will. None of them have published the line items. The royal warrants continued in the case of Barry Brothers and in the case of Veuve Clicquot. The other warrants of the era either passed to her daughter or were not renewed. The gin trolley itself survived. The trolley is, by multiple accounts, still at Clarence House. It is in storage, on the floor below the public rooms that visitors still tour as part of the Clarence House summer opening. It sits between the tea services from her wedding china and the sherry services that the household kept because the household keeps everything. The granddaughter-in-law who lives at Clarence House now, Camilla, the present queen consort, does not, by any account, use the gin trolley. She uses the tea service. The sherry service is unused. The gin trolley is unused. The trolley is, in the household inventory, the property of the crown. It has no plaque. By the time she died in 2002, the Queen Mother had spent 50 years inside an institution that had decided to call her 10 daily units charm. The pages who had carried the drinks were paid through staff lists that did not name them. The suppliers who had floated the accounts received settlements through a will that was sealed. The press office that had built the brand around her continued to call her relationship with alcohol a tipple, even after Spitting Image, even after Campbell, even after Quinn, even after the auction of the £16,000 Dubonnet note. The official biography did not perform the arithmetic. The official biography put the figure on the floor and walked over it. The official royal website continues, 24 years later, to walk over the same figure. You weren't imagining things. You were right. The audience that watched the same biographies and the same documentaries and the same spitting image puppets has been right for 40 years. The household had always known. The staff had always known. The suppliers had always known. The bankers had always known. The page of the back stairs had been carrying the trolley up the staircase 6 mornings a week for half a century, and the institution had been carrying the word for the same half a century. And the gap between the trolley and the word is the actual subject of this video. The gin trolley survives. It's in storage at Clarence House, between a service for tea that her granddaughter-in-law uses and a service for sherry that nobody uses. The suppliers she bankrupted are not named on any plaque. The page who carried it up the staircase 6 mornings a week for 4 years was, in 2007, denied a funeral invitation. The 101 years of life that the 70 units a week did not, in the end, prevent are still routinely described in obituaries and tourist guides and the official royal website as enjoyed a tipple. The gin trolley remembers the actual word for it. Nobody else officially does.